Assalamu alaikum, my dear students, third year students in the Department of English College of Education. Our topic today is total physical response, which is another approach used to teaching English as a foreign language. Previously, we have studied different approaches. Today, we have a new idea which is presented in the total physical response. First, I will start with the introduction approach to language teaching. Total physical response, abbreviated as TPR, is a method developed by Dr. James Asher in 1977, a professor of psychology at St. John's State University of California. Asher developed total physical response as a result of his experience in observing young children learning their first language. So first he was observing the way a child acquires the first language or the native language, and according to the way children acquire their first language, we can apply the same steps and the procedure to acquire or to learn another language. So Usher developed a total physical response as a result of his experience in observing young children learning their first language. He notes that interactions between parents and children often took the form of speech from the parents followed by physical response from the children. Sometimes we give certain commands to children, we produce language, and this is followed by action which is done by children since they don't know how to produce the language. They indicate that they understand what we are saying by performing the action that we are describing in the when we use language. So Asher made three hypotheses based on his observations. First, that language is learned primarily by listening. According to Asher, the students first should understand the language by listening comprehension, and then they will be able to produce the language and to learn the language. So the first idea is that Asher emphasizes understanding the language by listening to it. This is the primary step, as or in the same way as we acquire our native language. Second, that language learning must engage the right hemisphere of the brain. The brain is divided into two hemispheres, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. The right hemisphere is responsible for non-verbal behavior, which means it's responsible for actions, for human actions. That's why, according to Asher, that when we start learning language, first we listen to the language and then we respond depending on or with help of this right hemisphere by doing the action. And third, that language learning should not involve any stress. Asher emphasized the idea that students should not have any stress, should not be forced to produce the language. They should not have any anxiety during the process of language learning, which should be enjoyable, and it's very important to keep in mind how the students feel during the process of learning, and they should feel that they are free and that they are required to produce the language only when they are ready to do so. In total physical response, instructors give commands to students in the target language, and the students respond with whole body actions. So first, the teacher produces the command, for example, turn around, sit down, stand up, to the students, and the students respond with action. They do not produce the language, but they respond with action when they understand the meaning of the commands. Total physical response is a language teaching method built around the coordination of speech and action. That's why we say that we should address the right hemisphere also in the process of language learning. So we teach according to the connection between speech and action. It attempts to teach language through physical motor activity. And also, it is often used alongside other methods and techniques. It is a popular, sorry, total physical response is popular with beginners and with young learners since it requires action and enjoyment. So it is preferred to be used with beginners, although it can be used with students of all levels and all ages. But the most important emphasis here is that it's better to be used with beginners, with young and with young learners. In 1960s, James Asher's research gave rise to the hypothesis that language learning starts first with understanding and ends with production. As I have just mentioned previously, that first we need to listen to the language, we need to understand the language, and then produce it. After the learner internalizes an extensive map of how the target language works, speaking will appear spontaneously. So when learners receive enough understanding or enough listening to the language, as a result, the students will be able to produce the language, and the student's speech will not be perfect at the beginning, of course, but gradually speech will become more target-like, and if step by step they will learn how to use the target language in a correct way. And note that this is exactly how an infant acquires its native language, which means a baby or acquires its native language. A baby spends many months listening to the people around it long before it ever says a word. The child has the time to try to make sense out of sounds it hears. First, children try to understand the sounds they hear, then they try to respond by action to the sounds they hear. After this, they will be able to produce the language. No one tells the baby that it must speak. The child chooses to speak when it's ready to do so. The unconscious acquisition is favored over more conscious learning. So here, since we attempt to learn the language in the same way as we have learned our native language, in this case we prefer that this happens naturally without learning by the way of acquisition, by when the students understand the action and understand the meaning of what is said, they will be able to produce it naturally. Uh, Another important point that is creating a low affective filter is also a condition for acquisition that is met when the class atmosphere is one in which anxiety is reduced and the student's self-confidence is boosted. So in this case, we should work on reducing students' stress and anxiety and increasing enjoyment or increasing students' enjoyment and feeling that they should be relaxed and they will not be forced to speak before they are ready to do so. That's why we should work on making a low affective filter. The filter is kept low as well as by the fact that students are not put on the spot to speak. They speak when they are ready to do so. Most of students or language learners feel anxiety, feel stress when they are required to speak the language because they might think that what they produce is not correct in relation to pronunciation, in relation to meaning. But if they are given the impression that they are not forced to do anything unless they are ready to do so, this will increase their self-confidence. This will enrich the idea of self-confidence and at the same time will reduce stress and anxiety, and the students will have positive feeling during the process of language learning. The students listen to the teacher using the target language communicatively from the first day of instruction. So the teacher starts using the target language from the first day. But they should listen only to the teacher. They do not speak at first. The teacher helps the students to understand what the teacher is saying by using pictures and occasional words in the student's native language. Sometimes uh, words are used in the native language and by being as expressive as possible. It is thought that if the teacher uses language that is just an advance of a student's current level of proficiency, acquisition will proceed naturally. So, the language used by the teacher should be appropriate to the student's level of proficiency, and in this case, they will learn the language naturally, similar to the way they have learned the native. Now we start with the experience. It is the first class of the day, so after the teacher takes attendance, she introduces the method they will use to study English. She explains in Swedish, which means in the native language, you will be studying English in a way that is similar to the way you learned Swedish. So you will study English in a similar way by starting first with listening to the language, understanding it, performing the action according to your understanding, and then you will be able to produce the language. You will not speak at first, rather, you will just listen to me and do as I do. I'll give you a command to do something in English, and you will do the actions along with me. I'll need 4 volunteers to help me with the lesson. So the teacher asks 4 students to stand in front of the class in order to show the way they work together by listening to the teacher's command, practicing the or making the actions she commands, and then they will follow the teacher's commands. Hands go up, and the teacher calls on 4 students to come to the front of the room. The teacher and the students sit with their own chairs, which are lined up facing the other students. She tells the other students to listen and watch, which means that she attracts their attention to the fact that they should connect what they listen to the actions that they see. The actions are done by the teacher and then done by the teacher and other students. In English, the teacher says stands up, which means in the target language. As she says it, she stands up and she signals for the 4 volunteers to rise with her. So in this case, the teacher is acting what she says and asking other students to do as she's doing. And they all stand up. Teacher and the 4 students sit down, she says, and they all sit. The teacher and the students stand up and sit down together several times. According to the teacher's command, the students say nothing. The next time that they stand up together, the teacher issues a new command: turn around, and the students follow the teacher's example and turn so that they are facing their chairs. Turn around, the teacher says again, and this time they turn to face the other students as before. In this case, the teacher introduces the number of commands, up to 6 commands at the beginning, in order to make sure that the students have understood the meaning of each command and able to respond to each command by doing the required action. Next, the teacher signals that she would like one of the volunteers to follow her commands alone. One student raises his hand and performs the actions the teacher commands. Finally, the teacher approaches the other students who have been sitting, observing, and their their four classmates. So this means that the whole class, the volunteers and other students are doing the actions according to the teacher's commands. Sit down, stand up, jump, stop, sit down, stand up, turn around, jump, sit down. Here we see that the teacher is changing the order in which she gives the command. First starts with sit down, then she moves to stand up, jump, stop, sit down, stand. So she is not giving the commands in the same order every time in order to check if the students are understanding the commands and if they can respond to the commands correctly, even if they are not given to the same sequence. So they are not learning the sequence of actions, they are learning the commands themselves. So in this case, the students are able to perform according to the teacher commands, and the teacher is satisfied that the class has mastered these six commands. So this is part of the experience of the lesson conducted according to the total physical response. Now we will come about the experience. In thinking about the experience, we have observed important facts. We want to know what are the principles that underline such facts. First, the teacher gives commands in the target language and performs the action with the students. This method is related to language action association. At the same time, meaning in the target language can often be conveyed through actions. Memory is activated through learner's response. Beginning, language instruction should address the right hemisphere of the brain, which means the part which is responsible for controlling nonverbal behavior. The target language should be presented in chunks, not just word by word. So the teacher doesn't use individual words, the teacher uses phrases, the teacher uses commands in order to convey meaning. The students say nothing, the students' understanding of the target language should be developed before speaking. So first, it's essential that the students understand the language, then they will be able to produce it naturally. The teacher gives the commands quite quickly. The students can initially learn one part of the language rapidly by moving their bodies, and at the same time, this makes the idea of learning more enjoyable. The teacher sits down and issues commands to the volunteers. The imperative is a powerful linguistic device through which the teacher can direct the students' behavior. So the teacher uses imperatives, sit down, stand up, turn around, etc., in order to give the students directly commands and to help them to understand directly the connection between the language said and the action which is done. The teacher directs the students other than the volunteers. The students can learn through observing actions as well as by performing the actions themselves. So the volunteers learn by performing the action by themselves, and other students, the other students in the class observing the volunteers can also learn the actions. So the teacher asks both the students who are observing the volunteers as well as the volunteers to do the actions. Up to this point, we will stop. This is our lecture for today, and in our coming lecture, we will go on in the explanation of thinking about the experience. Thank you very much.